What would you do if your aunt left her kids with you and then blocked your number? That happened to me when she went on a cruise, and filing a police report only made her show up with CPS claiming I kidnapped them. I, 32M, never thought I'd be writing this, but here I am, still processing what happened 3 months ago. My aunt dropped her 2 kids at my apartment for what she said would be a weekend, and then vanished on a cruise, blocking my number and leaving me holding the bag. When I filed a police report, she showed up with CPS claiming I'd kidnapped them. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. Let me start from the beginning. My aunt has always been the type to ask for favors last minute. Growing up, my mom would complain about her younger sister showing up unannounced, needing money or a place to crash for a few days that would stretch into weeks. I'd heard the stories, but never experienced it firsthand since I moved across the state after college. We weren't close. Maybe saw each other at family gatherings twice a year, exchanged awkward pleasantries, and that was it. Then one Thursday evening in September, my phone rang. It was her. She sounded frantic, explaining that she had a work emergency and needed someone to watch her kids for the weekend. Her usual babysitter had fallen through, and she was desperate. The kids were 8 and 6. She said she'd pay me, make it worth my while. I hesitated because I worked from home but had a major project deadline that Monday. She kept pushing, saying I was her only option, that she wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. Against my better judgment, I agreed. She showed up at my apartment an hour later. The kids looked tired, clutching their backpacks. My aunt barely came inside, just handed me a garbage bag with some clothes and rattled off instructions about bedtimes and allergies. She promised she'd be back Sunday evening, thanked me repeatedly, and left before I could ask for details. The whole interaction took maybe 5 minutes. That first night was fine. The kids were quiet, watched TV while I made them mac and cheese. They seemed used to being shuffled around, didn't ask many questions. I set them up in my spare room with blankets and pillows, and they went to sleep without fuss. I figured it would be an easy weekend, just keep them fed and entertained, then hand them back. Saturday morning, I tried calling my aunt to ask about the kids' routines. The call went straight to voicemail. I sent a text asking what time they usually ate breakfast. No response. I shrugged it off, figuring she was busy with whatever work thing had come up. I made them pancakes, put on cartoons, and got started on my project. Every couple hours I'd check my phone. Nothing. By Saturday evening, I was getting concerned. I'd called 4 times, sent a dozen texts. All unanswered. The kids asked when their mom was coming back, and I told them soon, trying to sound confident. Sunday came and went with still no word. The kids were getting antsy, asking more questions I couldn't answer. I told them their mom must be working late, that she'd be here soon. I didn't believe it myself anymore. Monday morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't focus knowing something was off. I tried calling my mom to see if she'd heard from my aunt. Mom said she hadn't talked to her in weeks and asked what was going on. I explained the situation, and there was a long pause before she told me to be careful, that her sister had a history of disappearing when things got hard. That's when the unease turned into real worry. I tried looking up my aunt on social media. Her profile was set to private, but I could see she'd posted something the day before. A photo of a cruise ship with cocktails and a sunset. The caption said something about finally taking time for herself. My stomach dropped. She'd lied about the work emergency. She'd dumped her kids with me and gone on vacation. I called her probably 20 times that day. Every single call went straight to voicemail. I sent messages on every platform I could find her on. Nothing. It was like she'd blocked me completely. The kids were asking questions I couldn't answer. Where was Mom? When was she coming back? Why wasn't she calling? I did my best to keep them calm, told them she'd be back soon, but I was running out of convincing lies. By Wednesday, I was in over my head. I'd burned through my sick days, my project deadline had passed, and my boss was sending increasingly angry emails. The kids needed school supplies. The older one had homework I knew nothing about, and the younger one started crying every night asking for her mom. I had no legal authority over these children, no way to enroll them in school, no access to their medical records. I was trapped. Thursday morning, I made the decision to file a police report. I didn't want to get my aunt in trouble, but I needed help. I explained everything to the officer who took my statement. He seemed sympathetic, but told me these situations were complicated. They'd try to contact my aunt and see what could be done. He mentioned I might need to call CPS if she didn't turn up soon. The thought made me sick. The kids overheard parts of my conversation with the police and panicked. The older one started crying, asking if they were going to be taken away. I assured them everything would be fine, that I was just trying to find their mom. I felt like a liar. I had no idea what was going to happen. Friday afternoon, my apartment buzzer rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I answered, a woman's voice said she was from Child Protective Services and needed to speak with me. My blood went cold. I buzzed her up, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. The CPS worker was professional but firm. She asked about the kids, how long they'd been with me, why I'd filed a police report. I explained everything, showed her the texts from my aunt, the timeline of events. She took notes, asked to speak with the kids separately. I felt like I was being investigated for something I didn't do. Then she dropped the bomb. My aunt had called them. She'd told CPS that I had taken her children without permission, that she'd been trying to get them back all week, that I'd refused to return them, and blocked her number. She was claiming I'd kidnapped them. I couldn't breathe. The accusation was so backwards, so insane, that I just stood there staring at the CPS worker. She asked if I had any proof of what I was saying. I showed her everything. The call logs showing my aunt had called me first. The texts where she'd asked me to watch the kids. The dozens of unanswered calls and messages I'd sent her. The social media posts showing her on a cruise. The police report I'd filed. The worker's expression shifted as she reviewed everything. She said my aunt was on her way to my apartment right now with police, demanding her children back. I felt rage building in my chest. This woman had abandoned her kids with me, blocked my number, and was now trying to paint me as the criminal. 20 minutes later, my aunt showed up. She looked tan and relaxed, like she'd just come back from vacation. Which she had. She started immediately, her voice loud in the hallway, demanding to know where her babies were, asking how I could do this to her. The police officer with her looked uncomfortable. I let them in because I had no choice. My aunt rushed past me toward the kids, who were confused and scared by all the commotion. She hugged them dramatically, crying about how worried she'd been. I wanted to scream. The CPS worker asked my aunt to explain her side. My aunt spun this elaborate story about how she'd asked me to watch the kids for a few hours while she ran errands, that when she'd come back I wouldn't answer the door, that she'd been calling and texting all week, but I'd blocked her. She said she'd filed a missing persons report and was terrified I'd taken them out of state. I interrupted, my voice shaking with anger, and told everyone that was a complete lie. I pulled out my phone again, showed the timestamps on everything. The CPS worker had already seen it all, and she calmly asked my aunt to provide her phone records. My aunt's face changed. She started backtracking, saying maybe she'd gotten confused about the timeline, that she'd been so worried she couldn't think straight. The police officer asked her directly if she'd been on a cruise. My aunt hesitated, then admitted she had, but said it was only supposed to be a few days and she'd arranged for me to watch the kids. She claimed she'd told me all about it, that I'd agreed to watch them for the week. Another lie. I showed the officer our text exchange from the day she dropped them off. The work emergency story. The promise to be back Sunday. There was no mention of a cruise, no mention of a week. My aunt tried to argue that we discussed it on the phone, but the officer wasn't buying it. The CPS worker pulled my aunt aside for a private conversation. I could hear raised voices. When they came back, the worker said they'd need to investigate further, but that for now, the kids could go home with their mother. She gave my aunt a stern warning about making false reports and said someone would be following up. My aunt didn't look at me as she gathered the kids and their things. Before she left, the older kid turned and thanked me for taking care of them. That small gesture broke something in me. These kids had been pawns in whatever game their mother was playing, and they deserved better. After they left, I sat in my empty apartment feeling hollowed out. I'd lost a week of work, nearly lost my job, been accused of kidnapping, and been put through an investigation by CPS. All because my aunt wanted a vacation and saw me as a convenient dumping ground. The next day, I got a call from the CPS worker. She said they were opening a case on my aunt, that what she'd done was considered child abandonment, and that the false report would be documented. She thanked me for my cooperation and apologized for what I'd been through. It felt like cold comfort. My mom called later that day. She'd heard what happened from other family members and was mortified. She apologized for her sister, said she should have warned me more strongly. She told me my aunt was telling people I'd overreacted, that it was all a misunderstanding. I told my mom I wanted nothing to do with her sister ever again. But that wasn't the end of it. Not even close. Update 1. A week after the incident, I received an email from my aunt. No apology, no acknowledgement of what she'd done. Instead, she asked if I could watch the kids again the following month because she had another trip planned. I couldn't believe the audacity. I didn't respond. Then she started calling from different numbers. When I wouldn't answer, she'd leave voicemails asking why I was being so difficult, saying family should help family. She actually said that. After everything, she thought I owed her more favors. I blocked every number she called from. Then she started showing up at my apartment building. The first time, the doorman called up and I told him not to let her in. She waited in the lobby for 2 hours before finally leaving. The second time, she brought the kids with her, knowing I'd feel guilty. I watched from my window as she stood on the sidewalk, pointing up at my building, the kids looking confused. I felt sick, but I didn't go down. My mom called and begged me to talk to my aunt, to work things out for the sake of family. I told her there was nothing to work out. My aunt had abandoned her children with me, lied to authorities, and tried to get me arrested. There was no coming back from that. My mom understood but said other relatives were taking my aunt's side, believing her version of events. That's when I decided I needed to protect myself legally. I contacted a lawyer to discuss my options. The lawyer advised me to get a restraining order based on the harassment. I filed for one, including all the evidence of her false police report, the CPS investigation, and her continued unwanted contact. The court date was surreal. My aunt showed up with her own lawyer, acting like the victim. Her lawyer argued that I was being vindictive, that she'd made an honest mistake and was just trying to maintain a family relationship. My lawyer presented everything methodically. The timeline, the lies, the false accusations, the harassment. The judge was not sympathetic to my aunt. He granted the restraining order and made it clear that making false reports to CPS and police was a serious matter. My aunt left the courtroom in tears, but I felt no satisfaction, just exhaustion. Update 2. Things were quiet for about a month. Then I got a letter from my aunt's lawyer. She was suing me for defamation, claiming that I'd spread lies about her to family members and damaged her reputation. The lawsuit was clearly retaliatory, and my lawyer assured me it had no merit, but it still meant more time and money dealing with her nonsense. Around the same time, I heard through my mom that CPS had removed the kids temporarily. My aunt had apparently left them home alone for an entire weekend while she went to visit friends in another state. A neighbor had called it in. The kids were placed with foster care while CPS investigated. Part of me felt vindicated. This proved that what happened with me wasn't an isolated incident, that my aunt had a pattern of neglecting her children. But another part of me felt terrible for those kids. They didn't ask for any of this. CPS contacted me as part of their investigation. They wanted to know if I'd be willing to take the kids temporarily while they sorted things out. The request floored me. After everything, they were asking me to take on the responsibility my aunt had forced on me the first time. I thought about it for a long time. Those kids had been through enough, and they'd been kind to me during that nightmare week. But I also knew that taking them in would mean getting dragged deeper into the chaos my aunt created. I'd be responsible for them in a real way, with all the legal and emotional complications that came with it. I told CPS I couldn't do it. I explained that while I cared about the kids' well-being, I wasn't in a position to provide foster care, especially given the ongoing legal issues with their mother. The worker understood, though I could hear disappointment in her voice. The kids ended up staying with a foster family. I heard they were doing okay, considering everything. My aunt was required to take parenting classes and undergo supervised visits. The defamation lawsuit was dismissed within a few months, just as my lawyer had predicted. Update 3. 6 months after this all started, I got a message from my older cousin. She'd been asked by my aunt to reach out to me, to see if I'd be willing to drop the restraining order and reconcile. My aunt was apparently struggling with the CPS requirements and thought that if I wrote a letter saying she was a good mother, it would help her case. I was speechless. After abandoning her kids, lying to police, trying to have me arrested, harassing me, and suing me for defamation, she wanted me to help her. The delusion was staggering. I told my cousin absolutely not. I explained everything that had happened from my perspective, not sure how much she actually knew. My cousin admitted she'd only heard my aunt's version, which painted me as an overreacting troublemaker who'd turned a simple miscommunication into a legal nightmare. I sent my cousin all the documentation, call logs, texts, police reports, CPS records, everything. I watched as the story my aunt had told fell apart under the weight of evidence. My cousin apologized profusely and said she'd had no idea. She promised to set the record straight with other family members. That helped somewhat. A few relatives reached out to apologize for believing my aunt's lies. Others remained silent, either still believing her or not wanting to get involved. A handful took my aunt's side no matter what, calling me cruel for not helping with her kids and vindictive for pursuing legal action. I accepted that some family relationships were beyond repair. My aunt eventually completed her parenting classes and regained custody of her kids, though under close CPS supervision. I heard through the family grapevine that she'd gotten a job with more stable hours and seemed to be trying harder. I hoped for the kids' sake that was true. The restraining order remained in place. My aunt tried to have it lifted twice, and both times the judge denied her request. The harassment had stopped, but I wasn't willing to take chances. My life slowly returned to normal. I caught up at work, explaining to my boss what had happened. He was understanding, especially after I showed him the police report. I threw myself into my projects, grateful for the distraction. But the experience changed me. I became more cautious about who I helped, more aware of how people could take advantage of kindness. I also became more vocal within my family about enabling behavior. My aunt had been allowed to get away with irresponsible actions for years because people made excuses for her, cleaned up her messes, and looked the other way. I started having regular conversations with my mom about boundaries and accountability. She admitted she'd spent her whole life covering for her sister, bailing her out of problems, taking responsibility for her poor choices. She said watching what happened to me had been a wake-up call. The strangest part came almost a year later. I ran into my aunt at a family funeral. We were both there for a distant relative, and there was no way to avoid each other. She looked older, more worn down. When our eyes met across the room, she looked away quickly. Later, as people were leaving, she approached me. I tensed, ready for confrontation. But she just stood there for a moment, then said she was sorry. Not an explanation, not an excuse, just an apology. Then she walked away before I could respond. I don't know if she was genuinely sorry or if someone had coached her to apologize. I don't know if she understood the full impact of what she'd done or if she just regretted the consequences. It didn't really matter. The damage was done, and an apology couldn't undo it. I never responded to that apology. I never reached out. The restraining order eventually expired, and I didn't renew it because she'd finally left me alone. We exist in the same family, but in completely separate worlds. Sometimes I think about those kids and wonder how they're doing. I hope they're okay. I hope their mother got her act together and gave them the stability they deserved. But I also know that's not my responsibility. I learned the hard way that you can't save people who don't want to be saved, and you can't fix dysfunction that's been years in the making. The whole experience taught me that family doesn't give anyone the right to exploit you. That helping someone doesn't mean letting them destroy your life. That sometimes the kindest thing you can do is establish firm boundaries and stick to them, even when people call you heartless. I still get angry when I think about it. Angry that she put her children through trauma for a vacation. Angry that she tried to make me the villain. Angry that some family members still think I should have just dealt with it quietly instead of involving authorities. But mostly I'm just glad it's over. My life is mine again. I'm more careful about who I trust, more protective of my time and energy. I learned that being a good person doesn't mean being a doormat, and that sometimes the price of maintaining family peace is too high. Would I do anything differently if I could go back? Maybe I would have said no from the start when she first called. But I also know that if I had, she would have just found another victim. And at least by going through with it, by documenting everything and involving authorities, I helped create a record of her behavior that ultimately led to her kids getting the oversight they needed. That's the only silver lining I can find in this mess. That despite everything, maybe those kids are safer now because I refuse to stay quiet. That has to be enough. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends or family who might enjoy it too. Your support means a lot. And if you have any thoughts, questions, or story ideas, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next story.